Fine arts, photography, cinematography, and animation. What do all of these things have in common? You guessed it, it's composition. If you don't remember or you're new to my class, composition just refers to how elements of art or elements of your painting or drawing or whatever kind of canvas it is that you're working on, how those elements are arranged in the space. While fine arts and photography are traditionally still and only have to worry about one composition, cinematography and animation have to worry about the composition as it changes over time or as you transition to new scenes. If you've been in my class for any amount of time, you've most likely gone over some of these compositions like the S-shaped composition, the triangular composition, the L or cross-shaped composition, circular composition, radiating lines, grouping, and diagonal compositions. So rather than harp on these for a really long time and go over them in great detail, I'm going to provide a link in the description below if you need to review. It is the video that goes into each of those 7 different compositions in a lot more detail. If not, let's go ahead and move on to the next section. Those 7 compositions are used a lot in fine arts and painting and drawing and things like that, and also in photography and cinematography. However, one of the main things that you will see, or main compositional rules you'll see in photography and cinematography, is the rule of thirds. Even if you've learned about the rule of thirds before, it's important enough to repeat. It is something that you're going to see in every sort of editing software you'll ever use. If you go to crop a photo in your phone or in Photoshop, you're going to see the rule of thirds lines pop up. So, what are the rule of thirds and why do we do it? It's essentially a guideline to help make your artwork more aesthetically pleasing. It takes an image or a canvas and divides it into 3 sections horizontally and 3 sections vertically. And the rule states that if you have a horizon line, it's going to look more aesthetically pleasing if you put that horizon line basically on or just about on one of the horizontal lines that go across, like in these examples. Or if you have a particular subject you want emphasis on, you are going to put it on one of the vertical lines, or you're going to put it on one of the intersecting points. The most important part of your photo or painting should be on one of the intersecting points where it makes a little cross. So if you can imagine you're looking out at this landscape through your camera and you see the little frame, you're going to have to envision in your mind where the rule of third lines are going to fall. And then you're going to continue to zoom out or zoom in, whatever the case may be, so that your horizon line would fall either on that uppermost horizontal line or bottom one. Or if you wanted to make your person your subject, maybe you'd zoom in and put them on one of the intersecting points. If you're working close up on people, a lot of times what you'll see is the body is on one of the vertical lines and the head, the most important part, arguably, of a person is going to be on the intersecting points. So if we're taking this girl here and I am cropping this photo from its original tall frame to make it more aesthetically pleasing by following the rule of thirds, I'd probably crop it in so that the cross falls over top of her head. You can make your photograph even better by following the rule of thirds both horizontally and vertically, like this horizon line meets the bottom third and the tree meets the vertical horizon line on the right, as well as it also falls on one of the intersecting points. This horizon line is almost to that bottom horizontal third. The building to the left pretty much aligns with the vertical rule of thirds, and then the column aligns with the right side of the vertical rule of thirds. This boat is really a nice photo because we've got the horizon line of the water meeting the bottom third horizontally, and then the tops of the buildings almost meeting the top third horizontally. Then we also have the boat lining up with the leftmost vertical rule of thirds. It's just all working together really well. Same thing on this photo with the clotheslines. The 2 clotheslines pretty much line up with the rule of thirds horizontally, and then the buildings make up the left and right side of the vertical rule of thirds. Just like any other rule in art, it can be broken if it's for a good reason. Say you're trying to use a different composition, or in this particular example here, we have a horizon line almost dead center. However, our boat, our subject matter, is falling on that bottom horizontal rule of thirds line. So this does work with the rule of thirds and is compositionally appealing. In this next video, I want you to try and pay attention to how often the rule of thirds is used in this videography or cinematography. Go ahead and watch it once through and then we'll discuss it together. Alright, so starting over, you can see here we get the guy on the left in the rule of thirds, guy on the right in the rule of thirds. He starts walking out to the field using the rule of thirds. Oh, we're using the rule of thirds again. This is a center composition. Center composition. Oh, rule of thirds. And center composition, basically some diagonal. Oh, rule of thirds again. Even catching the balls, pretty much using the rule of thirds. My frame's not exactly right. Center composition, rule of thirds. So you can see that it's very, very important in not only photography, but cinematography, and then also it's going to be important in your animations because you are basically the director, the filmer, with total control whenever you're animating. I know some of this is repetitive, but it's really important, so thank you for hanging in there. And now we're going to hit on a few more tips and compositions that you can use and will be using in your photography and cinematography and animation and artwork, hopefully in the future. The first one is center composition, which is exactly like it sounds. It's when you place something smack dab in the middle of the page or vertically or horizontally, usually to give something emphasis, like this little pupper who's getting a treat and he's so happy. The next one is creating symmetry in your photograph or in your frame. So don't think about this too literally. It doesn't have to be perfectly symmetrical, but you're looking at in general, is it symmetrical? Is it pretty much balanced on both sides symmetrically? The next few I'm going to talk about are more tips to use in conjunction with your other compositions, but they're very important even individually enough to discuss. So the first thing would be to look for patterns. Whenever you are including patterns, there's just something about that repetition and predictability that makes our brains really, really happy. You can literally find patterns in almost anything. You will see it a lot in photography and buildings just because there are so many repeating lines typically, like these few sets of photos here of the same building. It's just really nice to look at. But it can be anything like chairs in the classroom or like this tractor that's cutting parallel lines into the ground that it's farming. It's just very satisfying to watch. Or maybe like this chain link fence. It almost has this sense of nostalgia, like we can all relate to what it's like walking outside of a chain link fence and we want to know what's on the other side. Or maybe you do a pattern intentionally because you're the artist and you're in charge. The next tip we're going to talk about is called leading lines. This again sounds exactly like what it is. It's where you are using implied lines within the photo or the artwork to lead your viewer's eyes either through that piece, through the space, or to something in particular, like a subject. A lot of times it's used in portrait photographs. So you will see one point perspective used quite a bit with leading lines, or leading lines used quite a bit in one point perspective, because that's essentially what it is. It's all lines leading to one common vanishing point in one point perspective, and then in 2 point and 3 point and so on. What's important about this is that it gives you control. You're in control of what the viewer is looking at. If you want them to look at the feet to get this sense of height of climbing, you can point it down like in this example. Or if we really want to focus in on that hand, we have that leading line of the handrail. The lines on the floor, the pattern on the floor create these parallel lines all leading toward the feet. Or the lines that are implied by the bench leading to the lady, or the lines of the guitar strings. When you're using leading lines, you are doing it for the specific purpose of either bringing your viewer's eye through the space or toward a specific subject. I really love this example with the books, the leading lines of the book going back in space toward the woman, but there's also another technique being used here called framing. Framing is a pretty fun technique, and again, it gives you a lot of control over what your viewer is focusing on. That's the power in framing. So think of it like if you had a picture frame and you wanted to show something in that picture frame to your audience, you are basically like throwing that picture frame into sometimes the background, sometimes the foreground, using the surrounding items like this door frame here to frame out your subject. While buildings and architecture are used a lot, don't let that be the only thing you use. Think about changing your perspective. What could you look through? What in your surroundings, what do you have that could change the way that you're viewing your subject? Can the frame you're using give more context to what's going on, like this woman shopping, or this woman in the window here who we don't know much about, but we can tell she's on a boat, right? We've got a lot of context clues just from the framing, the reflection in the glass, or even this lady looking in the mirror. This is a lot more powerful than if we had just seen her from the side looking in the mirror. We have this almost like we're experiencing it ourselves. This man here who's pressed against the glass so much you can literally see his fingertips flattening against it, it has a lot of emotional impact. And sometimes the framing is nothing more than just the fact that it looks nice. It looks better than if this woman were standing in front of a plain background. One last thing to consider when you're thinking about framing is, can you use light or shadow to help with your framing? Like in this example here, we have this guy who is basically framed by that rectangle or pentagon of light in the background. It doesn't light up his face anymore, but it definitely frames him. And then this example where we get this really nice close-up of the eye and the one strip of light on the eye. It's just such a different experience for us as a viewer with that framed out than if it had been completely lit up on the face. Something that's kind of opposite to framing is when you use majority negative space in your image. So your subject only takes up a small portion of the space, but it makes it really dramatic. It doesn't even need to be completely blank. It just needs to have the smallest portion devoted to your subject. And sometimes it's made to emphasize the proportions, the sizing. Maybe something's really tiny. It can also be used to make us feel a little bit uncomfortable, or give us the perspective of someone who's feeling that discomfort, like this woman who is making herself smaller and smaller in this big amount of negative space. We can sense that she's very uncomfortable. In the same vein, we can look at this one and feel this student's isolation. He's the only one in this room. So we can feel it so much more than if we had just been right at his desk viewing him. This one, we can definitely feel the sense of being left behind with the focus on the girl off in the distance. I think it also does a nice job of showing something small as a part of a whole, or something that would be seemingly insignificant and pulling our attention to that thing. If I had money for every time I saw a scene like this where we pull out from this vast ocean scene and it shows our insignificance, or this scene where we have the fade away or the zoom out from the person in the desert, and we see just how futile their trek through the desert is. I may not have a lot, but I'd have more money than I have today. You also see a lot of times this distant car, again, just showing maybe how massive this forest is, or if you could view this in a city, how big the city is. If you're watching a movie, it would get that message across really quickly. And that's really the whole point of learning about composition, is learning how to communicate in the visual language. We're making something that looks aesthetically pleasing, but also communicates exactly what we want it to. Like, the bunny is cute. The house is isolated, deserted. We have this sense of adventure with the hand through the air, so on and so forth. We can even use it to help predict an action. So keep that in mind for your animations. Like this one with the bell, we could know that a hand is coming to ring it soon. Sometimes you'll see it just to highlight the intricacy of something or to maybe market a product. You'll see it a lot in commercials for food. If they're really trying to make something look delicious, they'll focus in on just that one thing, and everything, all the space around it is just empty. The true opposite side of things, we have very, very little negative space, and we fill the screen so much so that we're oftentimes cropping out our subject. And as you can see, it gives us some really nice, aesthetically pleasing compositions here. It's just the intricacy of everything, the detail of everything is oftentimes enough motive to go ahead and do this technique where you're cropping out most of the negative space. However, it's also just another way to communicate, like we talked about before. Like in these examples here, you're showing an action, you're getting the viewer to focus in on a specific action, which a lot of times can communicate how the person that we're viewing is feeling, or maybe show what they believe in or care about. Or maybe it's to give us sort of a sensory experience. Like with these examples, we could hear the record or hear the sizzling of the tomatoes or smell them, hear the clicking clock. We've all kind of had that experience, and it'll help us focus in on that sound. Or maybe it puts us inside the shoes of the person or thing that we're looking at. Like, I really feel like we're moving along with this dog. Or maybe it's going to give us a sense of the relationships of the objects involved. Like with this shot, it's just one of the ways they hint at the closeness of their relationship, their friend group. Take a look at the difference. If we look at this fish, but we actually crop in tighter on it, it gives us a different sense or feel to the video. If we crop even tighter, we can almost, again, feel like we're sensing the motion ourselves. Same thing for this one with the sunflower. If we crop it in more, we definitely get a different experience, and even tighter, then you can see the bee really focus in on what it's doing. The last tip we're going to talk about is changing the point of view, your perspective. And I saved it for last because it's the one that can get a bit uncomfortable. A lot of times you're going to see photographers getting in weird positions because you have to think about what is going to look best for the shot. Do I need to be straight above? Maybe to get the shot you need to stand on something. Think about what all you're wanting to include in the shot. Am I trying to get this woman coming up the stairs or just her? And that brings me to, if you're trying to frame something, you might have to get behind that something, like get behind these bars. What is going to give you that interesting perspective, that interesting point of view? Create leading lines. Maybe instead of standing on something, you need to look up at something. Maybe you want your subject to look prominent like that. Or you want to capture an interesting perspective that people don't normally see. And sometimes you might need to lay down on the ground. Or set your camera on the ground. Sometimes you're going to need to get into the situation that your subject is. Like get in the water, climb up the slide, sit on the merry-go-round as it's spinning. You might even risk getting hit. Just remember, is it worth damaging your camera? So you have to make that decision. And probably the most uncomfortable of all, do you need to get in someone's personal space? How close to their face do you need to be? Imagine this girl looking up at you, wondering what the heck you're doing taking a picture of her just trying to read. How close do you need to be to that guy? To get the best picture, you have to be willing to do whatever it takes to get the right perspective, the right point of view, the right angle. Because remember, this is communicating something. When you guys are taking pictures, I don't want you to just do the obvious. Try taking pictures from different points of views. Like, yes, go ahead and take the forward-facing picture of the graduate, but think about what else could you do. Take from multiple angles. Think about if you need to be from above or from below and how that changes what you communicate. A lot of times if you put a person right in the center or your subject right in the center and then you're looking up at them, it gives them a sense of authority or power. Think about, do you need to stand on something or look through something that's in the area to create that framing sort of effect? Also, can you use leading lines? I really love this composition with the angled staircases. Just that those diagonal lines are just really, really nice. Creates a lot of a dynamic composition and a lot of movement within it. So whenever I give you guys your assignments to go take pictures and you find a subject to take it from many different angles and points of views. Experiment. Don't just use one photograph of something you think you want and then leave. You can't have too many photos. If you take 20 photos of something and only one of them is good, then great. You have one excellent photo. But unless you took those 20, maybe you wouldn't have gotten that photo. Sometimes it's the experimentational angle that looks the best. So what do you think? Ready to get started? Let me know when you're finished with this video and I'll get your first assignment posted. Good luck and have fun!